Okay, so this is the last module of Unit 3. It's Module 15, Evolutionary Psychology, Understanding Human Nature. So the first section is Natural Selection and Adaptation. We've talked about natural selection before, but just to give you a good, solid definition, it's the principle that among the range of inherited trait variations, those contributing to reproduction and survival will most likely be passed on to succeeding generations. Well, over time, selected traits confer a reproductive advantage on a species and will prevail. So an example of trait selection, breeders have created a domesticated breed of foxes by only breeding the tamest 5% of males and the tamest 20% of females. So they've passed on that tame trait by only breeding certain ones. And this is on purpose, but over generations, these things happen naturally. There are things called mutations, where it's a random error in a gene replication that leads to a change. And mutations are just things that randomly happen to change a gene. Nature has selected advantageous variations from new gene variations produced at each human conception and the mutations that sometimes result. Each generation has its own mutations and changes in DNA. So sometimes those mutations that occur are beneficial, and so those mutations then will get passed down to the next generations. The genes selected during our history provide us with the capacity to learn and adapt to life in various environments. And our adaptive flexibility in responding to different environments contributes to our fitness, meaning our ability to survive and reproduce. That's what fitness is referring to, our ability to survive and reproduce. So evolutionary success helps explain similarities. Our emotions, drives, and reasoning have a common logic across all cultures, and they were all shaped by natural selection across the course of human evolution. Similarities arise from our genome, our common genetic profile. 5% of the genetic differences among humans arise from population group differences. However, 95% of genetic variation exists within populations. So Darwin's theory of evolution has been an organizing principle for biology for a long time. It now lives on in the second Darwinian revolution, which is the application of evolutionary principles to psychology. So basically, how are our minds adapting throughout the generations? Darwin wasn't necessarily speaking about the brain or the mind, but that's like Darwin 2.0. We're talking about how it affects psychology. So an evolutionary explanation of human sexuality. Men have a lower threshold for perceiving warm responses as a sexual come-on. And this misattribution helps explain why men have a greater sexual assertiveness. While women usually incubate and nurse one infant at a time, a male can spread his genes through other females. So a woman will only have one at a time unless there's a twin or multiple situation, but a male can go ahead and spread his genes however much he wants. So women pair wisely, men pair widely, and this is of course not true for all men. This is just overall in history, in the evolution of human experiences. Men who were drawn to healthy, fertile appearing women stood a better chance of sending their genes into the future. And so again, this doesn't apply to every single man, but just throughout evolutionary history, we see that men tend to be more attracted to women with hourglass figures because in evolutionary history, it's been a sign of fertility. And men tend to prefer the most fertile women no matter what age the men themselves are. So, for example, teenage boys usually want women in their early 20s. That's the most fertile stage. Men in their early 20s want women in their early 20s, and older men are also attracted to women in their early 20s because it's the most fertile stage. Women are attracted to men who seem mature, dominant, bold, and affluent. So very different from the attraction for men. So nature selects behaviors that increase the likelihood of sending one's genes into the future. So we are designed to prefer whatever worked for our ancestors, and we are similarly predisposed to the same thing. So once again, as far as like the attraction of men and women, this is just evolutionary history. It doesn't apply to every single person. So reflections in nature and nurture. We are formed by our genes, nature, but we are also influenced by our experiences, or nurture. So while we are the product of nature and nurture, we are also on an open system. We're an open system. People can defy their genetics sometimes. So in reality, we are both the creatures and creators of our world. And our decisions today shape our environments tomorrow. When Galileo offered the idea that the earth revolves around the sun, he didn't offer proof. He offered a coherent explanation that organized observations logically. Well, Darwin did the same thing with the theory of evolution. So everything that is psychological is simultaneously biological. Okay, and that's short and sweet for Module 15. If you have any questions, just note them down and we'll go over them in class.